Welcome everyone to today's Partner Positives webinar presentation. This is a series presented by Neon One, which showcases the breadth and depth of our ecosystem to ensure that nonprofits are provided any single need that they have. And this is a series that allows me to also kind of explore the different things that nonprofits need to engage. And so before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Neon One on our next slide. If you don't know who we are, Neon One is a technology ecosystem serving mission-driven organizations. We do a lot of different things, as the next slide will showcase. But ultimately, our mission is focused around helping organizations grow and become sustainable in all ways. We want to power the future of philanthropy, and we do that in a variety of different services and software. The one that we're going to be kind of tying today's topic to is Neon CRM, which is a donor management tool that powers thousands of organizations of all sizes. I myself have used it since 2011, and it was really cool to kind of start to play around and see how Bitcoin can fit seamlessly into how you manage your overall data stewardship. So we're going to unpack that at the very tail end of today's presentation. But Neon One's ecosystem also does things like giving days, client case management, peer-to-peer fundraising, arts and ticketing. I mean, heck, I can't wait till Bitcoin and theater, musical theater somehow get joined, Alex. I think that's going to be cool down the line. Neon Web Studio is also helping organizations leverage the beauty and design of exciting people around a mission. But one of the key things that I oversee as Director of Strategic Partnerships is ensuring that if someone comes to us, we serve over 30,000 nonprofits. We've raised a lot of money. And really the reason we're able to do that is not because we do it alone. It's because we're more powerful by finding partners. And for a while now, as I analyze trends, because we're partners with the the National Council of Nonprofits, we're partners with AFP International and Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, all these institutions that allow us to understand what are the trends of giving, what are the trends of philanthropy, and Bitcoin has always been on my radar. I attended the conference of National Council of Nonprofits last year, and they did a session on Bitcoin, and that kind of clued me into, hey, we got to pay attention to this. So I was on the hunt for some of the best people to been able to do that, and that's how I came across the Giving Block. So I'm excited to be debuting that. Before we get into that, on the next slide, let's just go through a few simple housekeeping items. If we click one more time, we'll see what these icons actually mean. One, this is being recorded right now, so we'll record the questions, we'll record the discussions that we have. We'll be making this available on our partner channel, YouTube, as well as providing any follow-up information if you need it. So rest assured, if you have to leave early, maybe you're so excited that you want to get Bitcoin at the level it's at right now and want to focus on that, cool, we'll be recording this, and of course we'll be answering questions. Now, another fun thing that we want to do next, on the next slide before I hand it on over to our friends, is follow along with the conversation. So I'll be actually kind of muting myself and paying attention to different social media, primarily Twitter. And so if you wanted to actually put your comments, put your questions, not only here, but to make it a little bit more social, join the conversation by using hashtag Bitcoin Tuesday. Alex is going to get into exactly why that hashtag. There's some really exciting things that they're going to be talking about there. But wanted to kick off the conversation too, if you either wanted to use the Q&A that's part of our interface here, or joining the social conversation, got a question for you to kick things off on the next slide before I hand it on over to the folks over at the Giving Block. What's the biggest thing stopping your organization from embracing Bitcoin? I mean, you're obviously attending a presentation on it. This is a bucket list item that I've been excited about to present and find somebody that can really, really do it justice. But, you know, you're attending this conversation, or you're maybe watching this at a later time, which is why we would love for you to use the hashtag Bitcoin Tuesday to answer this as well as join the conversation. What's the biggest thing stopping you? Now, Alex, I'm gonna hand it on over to you, and maybe you can help us understand how we can get past these obstacles and really look toward the future of philanthropy here. So really excited to hand it on over to the folks at Giving Block, and I'll be back later while also watching the conversation online.
Awesome. Thanks for the great intro, Tim, and we're excited to be here too. We'll start off with quick overview of the agenda, and then we'll get into some introductions. So we'll start with introductions. We'll go through kind of the why of crypto fundraising. Why are people donating cryptocurrency, and why are nonprofits accepting it? Then we'll run through some of the basics around, what is Bitcoin, what is cryptocurrency, what do these terms mean? Then we'll run through common misconceptions, which are, kind of the FAQ section where we hear these questions a lot. And then we'll go on to crypto fundraising, the how. Then we'll have success stories, and then we'll end with plenty of time for Q&A, but please do submit your questions throughout, and we'll make sure to get to them. So some quick background, Pat and I here, we are the co-founders of the Giving Block. My background was actually originally on the for-profit things side. I was consulting Fortune 500 companies on emerging technologies like blockchain, cryptocurrency, AI, and IoT. And then I kind of caught the blockchain and cryptocurrency bug and went down that rabbit hole. Started investing and trading pretty heavily, then did some venture capital work in the space. And then around that time, Pat and I had the idea of the Giving Block. But I'll let Pat give a little bit of background about himself.
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Pat Duffy. I was working at the Lucas Foundation when Alex and I first started linking up on work in the cryptocurrency space. When we started trading together, quickly realized, just seeing a handful of larger donations happening out there in the ecosystem, that it made sense to get the Lucas Foundation equipped to accept crypto and to do that in the right way. So we developed some educational content, ultimately a wallet solution, and a handful of other core components. And then, as we got to the end of those steps, we realized, why not replicate this? And slowly but surely, we formed a business.
So the first piece, this is kind of an overview of what we're hoping to accomplish with this. So, most people come into these sorts of presentations about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, essentially avoiding it. So at least by joining this, you've kind of gotten past this initial state where people think, it's too confusing, I'll never get it, it doesn't make sense. But we're hoping if you're at this address place where you probably are by attending this, where you're starting to understand it or want to understand it, we really want you to get to this place where you're really starting to get it. And you're really starting to pay attention to Bitcoin and how it can help your nonprofit. But we also like to put this in context. After this presentation, you'll know more about Bitcoin than you do about most of the technology you interact with on a daily basis. So even though we will explain, how Bitcoin works and how cryptocurrency works, don't worry about knowing every little detail about how the technology works. Think of it more as, how is it going to help your organization? How are you going to interact with it? For example, you use Wi-Fi or your cell phone every day. You don't necessarily know exactly how the tech behind those devices work. You just care about how it helps you and how you interact with it. So I would recommend thinking about cryptocurrency in a similar way. But either way, we'll go into some of the details of how the technology actually works.
Sure. So this next section is going to be focusing on the why behind crypto fundraising. So why organizations are paying attention. The core pieces here, the first one is really primary. So the IRS treats cryptocurrencies as property. So the way they classify them when you're filing your taxes is very much the same as stocks, a house, a car, any other sort of property. Most of the organizations on the line probably accept stocks. Some probably have unique policies around accepting a home or a car. With cryptocurrencies, the same tax benefits exist for donors. So if anyone has an appreciated cryptocurrency, the only way for them to get that tax benefit, where they can write off those capital gains, is to transfer that asset directly. So in other words, only organizations that accept cryptocurrency donations offer donors this tax benefit. As the cryptocurrency ecosystem grows, there's currently somewhere in the range of 50 million users. that will continue to become a larger and larger demographic of potential donors who can only give to organizations who accept cryptocurrency directly. The thank you aspect comes down to when a nonprofit begins accepting cryptocurrency, because the technology is still on this adoption curve, where folks are just now starting to use it more commonly. We see it with Facebook's Libra, with JP Morgan's cryptocurrency. For the time being, people in this ecosystem are still looking for people to join their team. And the mere act of a nonprofit accepting cryptocurrency, from our experience thus far, has appeared to be enough to generate some donations, some attention, and people wanting to contribute in that asset to say thank you for joining our team and adopting this technology. The third and final piece would be not from an individual donor's perspective, but the incentive for a corporate partner. So there's a corporate social responsibility angle with crypto, much in the same way that exists with traditional corporate partners, but actually a little bit more expansive. So just like any other company, working with a nonprofit makes sense when there is alignment, say, between what their causes are, and then an opportunity where they need to get their story out there and generate a larger audience. With cryptocurrency, all of those traditional CSR incentives do exist. And what's layered on top of that is the lack of mainstream acceptance for the time being. So in other words, companies that operate within this space have a uniquely enhanced incentive to partner with nonprofits to tap into a more traditional audience, to be seen as legitimate, and as one of the key players within their ecosystem. So we're seeing more and more corporate social responsibility partnerships coming out of exchanges and other corporate players in the blockchain space. This is really just a breakdown of what that tax incentive looks like. If you're an organization that takes stocks, you're probably familiar with it. With stocks, it's obviously more difficult to transfer stock than it is to type in a credit card. What makes cryptocurrency unique is it's easier to send a crypto transaction than it is to plug in a credit card. It's really just copying and pasting a wallet address. We can get into it a little bit more later, but super straightforward. So you have this exact same tax incentive as stocks, with the easiest potential way for them to give. So what we're looking at here is if someone wanted to donate $1 million in Bitcoin that they had bought at an original price of $100,000 with a federal capital gains tax rate of 20%, this would be the difference in the amount that they would contribute to the organization versus paying that instead difference over to the IRS in the form of a capital gains tax. So for an individual, that means a significantly smaller write-off on their taxes and a significantly smaller contribution to the nonprofit. So the difference is big, and this is what we're seeing thus far as the driving incentive behind Bitcoin donations and other cryptocurrencies as well. Finally, so that was from the perspective of the donor, more or less. This is from the perspective of the nonprofit. Why are nonprofits starting to accept it more and more? Number one is it's easy. So not easy necessarily to navigate the landscape and figure out communications. It's obviously an interesting technology with its own community that requires specific engagement. What is easy is going through the process of setting up an account. So it's very much the same as if you were setting up a Fidelity account or an account with a bank. You're going to go through pretty standard compliance processes. And once you have that account, then you're able to, say, integrate with us with a widget or set up a way of accepting cryptocurrency donations. It's popular. So as I already mentioned, we've got somewhere in the range of 50 million cryptocurrency users. Just a couple years ago, that looked more like 25 million. So it's growing really consistently. And the number of users has grown while the price was going up, of course. But also during times when the price is sliding, that user base is growing as well. So the technology is becoming more widely adopted. For millennials, or for half of millennials rather, cryptocurrency is already the preferred way to invest. So we've already reached a tipping point with younger generations, meaning it's a really good way to engage a younger audience and potentially collect larger donations due to the tax incentive. And then finally, there are more Google searches for donate Bitcoin than for donate stocks, which is fairly staggering. Part of that has to do with the fact that donating stocks rather is more difficult, both for the nonprofit in terms of having a broker and for the individual in terms of coordinating that. But the other piece is Bitcoin is incredibly popular. It gets searched more often than the word coin, for example. And for a celebrity reference, it's more popular than Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift, etc. You can go on to trends.google.com and plug in some celebrities and check it out if you're interested. Finally, not only is it popular, it's exciting, meaning that when you have communications around a big day like Giving Tuesday or a key fundraising moment for your organization throughout the year, it's a way to cut through the noise. So with so many folks trying to fundraise online, if you're a nonprofit saying we take donations and the other nonprofit says we take donations including Bitcoin, generally speaking, you're going to get a little more traffic and get a little more mileage out of your communications. So it's a bit of an exciting tool for your existing audience and for finding a new one.
And one thing I just want to add to the last section before we move on is, what we're talking about is purely the concept of accepting cryptocurrency donations, not investing in them. I think that's an important distinction to make. That we're not advocating for nonprofits to invest in cryptocurrencies, purely accepting them like you would a stock. All right, so now we'll cover some basics of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So this first analogy I want to talk through is, what is the difference between Bitcoin, crypto, and blockchain? You've probably seen all three of these terms at some point, but maybe weren't quite sure how they relate to one another. So this example we use is a Honda is a car, and cars are powered by engines, the engines being the underlying technology of the car. So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrencies are powered by blockchain, blockchain being the underlying technology behind Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So just like a Honda is one of many different car companies, Bitcoin is one of many different cryptocurrencies out there. So let's dive into Bitcoin specifically a little bit more. So Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, and it launched at the end of 2009, by either a person or a group of people that were going by the name Satoshi Nakamoto. It's still unknown who exactly the founder was, but they published the open source code, and it's been, essentially living on in a decentralized way ever since. So even though Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, there's been a lot of different cryptocurrencies popping up since then, but Bitcoin has still managed to kind of keep the #1 spot. It's still the most well-known. It still has the largest market cap. And even though, you might hear on the news, Bitcoin is trading at X price, maybe it's $8,000, maybe it's $10,000, that doesn't mean people need to buy or transact in a full Bitcoin. So it's highly divisible up to 8 decimal places. So you can buy and move and transact in really small amounts if you wanted to. Another huge defining feature of it is that it's truly peer-to-peer, in the sense that if I were to send Tim or Pat, $10 in Bitcoin, it's truly going from my Bitcoin wallet into their Bitcoin wallet without it going through any sort of middleman. So it's cutting out the bank or the payment processor in the middle for these peer-to-peer transactions, meaning that you're essentially putting your trust in this open source code and trusting the computers versus, let's say, a bank teller or a human more generally who is processing those transactions or managing these financial systems. So it takes out a lot of the guessing, in a sense, because you really know what you're going to get, because the code is already established. It's set in stone, essentially, in the sense that it's always going to perform in the same way that you expect it to. There's no sort of possibility for manipulation or fraud in the middle. If you say, I want to send my Bitcoin to Pat or Tim, as long as you put in their address as the destination, it's always going to arrive there. Another really cool part about it, it's global. So you can think of it almost as this global digitally native currency that can cross borders very easily and cheaply. So you're seeing it also being used for things like distributing aid abroad, because you can move huge amounts of money for often less than $1. So there's a lot of cool examples where people have moved, for example, $200 million and spent $1 or less on that transaction fee, and it's taken just a matter of seconds or minutes. So often, let's say you want to send money from the U.S. here in Washington D.C. where we are to Tokyo. The fees are generally going to be pretty high, and it's often going to take days. In the case of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, that's usually taking seconds or minutes and costing, less than $1. This last bullet about security is really important too. So the Bitcoin network is incredibly secure, and the reason for that is, and we'll get a little bit into this on the next slide too, but instead of having this centralized sort of middleman like a bank in between all the transactions where there's really one centralized point of failure, in this case you have a distributed network of different nodes, which are essentially computers running the network. So in order to try to attack the network, you would actually need to take control more than half of the network. In the case of Bitcoin, that's tens of thousands of computers all around the world, making an attack incredibly difficult. On this next slide, this is kind of the basic flow of how a transaction works to help you visualize a little bit. But if I'm the sender, sending, let's say, $10 worth of Bitcoin to Tim, I enter in his wallet address as the destination. That transaction gets broadcast out to this network, which are, like I was saying, these different computers running all around the world, and they are essentially racing to process that transaction and crack algorithms, which will complete the transactions. So there are what are called miners in the network, and they are essentially what are replacing the middlemen. So you can think of them as these huge computer networks that are just running for the purpose of processing transactions on the Bitcoin network. Anyone can join the network and participate in it as long as you buy the right hardware and download the software to run. And the reason, kind of on the bottom half of this, you see the block. So once at least half the network has agreed on the transaction, it gets added to a block and then added to the chain. So that's where the name blockchain comes from. The block gets added to the chain, and then you have this long chain of auditable records going all the way back to the very first Bitcoin transaction in early 2009. So this next section is around common misconceptions. These are some of the most common questions we get on a regular basis, and I'll let Pat run through a couple of these.
Yeah, so this first one we touched on a little bit already, but the number of users, how many people are really using this stuff, is kind of the way it gets framed. There's a lot of folks out there who are using cryptocurrency, and again, that's grown during price increases, which is more or less speculators, people trying to get rich quick, say, toward the end of 2017. But during price decreases now, we've reached a point where we see significant growth in users. As the price decreases, meaning people are just starting to actually use it, not necessarily go in, buy it, hope to make a little bit of money. It's becoming more normal. So the largest cryptocurrency exchange here in the US would be Coinbase. And as a point of reference, in November 2017, they had about 13 million accounts. And as of October 2019, that number is above 35 million. So that's just here in the US. And what's interesting about those numbers as well is they've been adopting more cryptocurrencies as a part of the spectrum. So folks are coming in and at it from a number of different angles. That user base also is larger than some of the largest exchanges for stocks. Brokerages in the US like Charles Schwab or Fidelity are significantly smaller than even this one exchange here in the US. So it's become a really large demographic worthy of attention. This next piece is also critically important. This slide we originally made sort of in jest for my mother when we first started paying attention to cryptocurrencies and trading individually. When there were price decreases, my mom would often text and call, she still does, and pretty much ask me if Bitcoin is dead. Or she tells me, kind of instructively, that Bitcoin has crashed and I should no longer be paying attention. So over time, over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, Bitcoin is actually the best appreciating asset in the world. And by that, I mean there have been large price corrections, but in any 2-year period, more or less, you can pick a timeline and you'll discover that Bitcoin's price does increase over time despite major volatility. And that volatility is, of course, going to decrease over time as more institutional investors get in. But again, as a nonprofit, you don't invest in this stuff. And when you receive these donations, almost everyone we work with and everyone who's taking donations in the crypto space, they're converting automatically, meaning when crypto hits the account, it's immediately converted to cash. What's important in terms of this volatility and the price changes is that if you're someone who bought Bitcoin in 2010, say a potential donor, and you're looking to make a donation to a nonprofit today, if you spend $100 on Bitcoin in October of 2010, it's worth somewhere in the range of 16 million based on today's price of Bitcoin, which is of course astounding. And if you're trying to cash out, you have a very strong incentive to make a contribution to a organization in this format. So again, let's say Bitcoin's price went down today instead of up. As a nonprofit, that shouldn't make a difference to you. What it makes a difference is on the long-term timeline, individuals have bought, now held, and are looking to turn in highly appreciated assets, and contributions to a nonprofit is a really smart way for them to go about reducing their tax burden.
So now this next section will talk through the how of crypto fundraising. So some key considerations to think about as you're thinking about accepting cryptocurrencies. So a huge piece of this is selecting the right solution to accept cryptocurrency donations. And as part of that, you need to think about which cryptocurrencies are we going to accept? Is it just going to be Bitcoin, or is it going to be others as well? Are we holding on to the crypto we get as a donation, or are we having it automatically converted? And as a note, most nonprofits are opting to have it automatically converted, at least the ones that we're working with. Another consideration is around the audience. Is this going to be, marketed more towards your existing audience or a new audience? And then on the marketing front, how much time and effort is your team going to put into marketing and promoting this? And as part of that, what we've seen is an interesting kind of two core outcomes. So we've actually seen this be used as a marketing tool just as much as a fundraising tool because of kind of the excitement around it. For example, with a lot of organizations, when we work with them, we generally put out, essentially a press release or a blog post announcing, we are starting to take Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. We're really excited to engage the community. And often those announcements are some of their best performing pages on their website for that year. Because of how quickly that spreads in the crypto community. So the marketing outcomes are really important and a really real part of this beyond just the fundraising.
Yeah, and let me jump in for one thing on top of that. For the marketing piece, what's really important to note is it depends on the way your organization looks as to how you need to think about what's necessary, like a bottom threshold, and then what's additional? What else can you do to try to generate attention? For a large nonprofit organization, opening cryptocurrency wallets and more or less announcing that you're taking it is probably enough to make it worth your time and energy getting set up. Because of the size of your existing audience, that one tweet, let's say, is going to access enough people and be spread enough to where you're going to target enough donors and they're going to make contributions. And then smaller organizations potentially who may say, we want to get set up to take cryptocurrency, but our marcoms team is small and we don't have a ton of time for this. We're going to tweet every now and then throughout the year, remind people that we take it, but we're not necessarily going to campaign around it. And then there's people in the middle who have built a brand more or less on the fact they're taking crypto. There are nonprofits out there that do this solely, and you don't need to think about it that way necessarily, of course, unless that is your approach. But again, it's important to note that organizations can be successful just getting set up to take it, reminding donors every once in a while, especially if you're a large organization. It's just a matter of if you really want to get folks fired up and try to generate a bigger audience and a larger program, then the effort, of course, correlates with that.
This next piece is on common pitfalls. So these are some of the mistakes we see sometimes when nonprofits decide they want to start fundraising cryptocurrency on their own. In some cases, they will open up the cryptocurrency wallets and essentially just expect the crypto to come in. But that doesn't usually happen unless they're engaging the surrounding community. So they'll say, okay, we've decided we're taking Bitcoin, but they don't tell anyone. And then they are somehow surprised that they aren't getting any donations, even to the point where some nonprofits aren't even putting it on their website. So it's really important that you kind of follow best practices if you are going to accept cryptocurrency donations. Another piece around this is, of course, the messaging because of the strong marketing outcomes from this. So like any targeted demographic, they have kind of their their own even slang and way of talking about this technology. You want to make sure you're seen as someone who knows what you're talking about when you're messaging about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The last piece is around, picking the right solution. There's a lot of solutions out there, but not a whole lot of choice when it comes to finding one that works well for a nonprofit. Some of them have very complicated or technical setups, no features for automatically converting it, or just have a poor donor experience that isn't tailored to a cryptocurrency user.
Yeah, and then this last section here is going to be success stories. So organizations that have been successful fundraising crypto. The Ellen DeGeneres Wildlife Fund, what Ellen received in terms of crypto donation was a $4 million Ripple. It's a specific kind of crypto. $4 million Ripple donation on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And that was delivered by Ashton Kutcher as the liaison for the company. So that was one of the big kind of turning points for us in our communications at LFA originally, getting folks excited around the idea of taking crypto. So that was a major gift accepted one time by a large organization that generated a huge amount of buzz and a story that spread a while. But that's kind of the corporate social responsibility angle. So that's a company coming in and recognizing the value of that sort of a partnership. If you look over to the right then, you see the Human Rights Foundation. And with the Human Rights Foundation, what you have is a smaller organization, but with a key opinion leader named Alex Gladstein, who talks a lot about cryptocurrencies. He talks a lot about them in the context of human rights. So what you see in Venezuela with hyperinflation of their currency, we've seen microeconomies develop where people are using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin to get by, to buy necessary goods, support their families, and keep kind of small-scale economies going. So it's become a tool for freedom in that country. He also sees it as a tool for freedom in, say, China, where if you're under an oppressive regime and you're a political actor who's not necessarily in alignment with the powers that be, you can have accounts shut down, you can be pushed from the central points of society. And folks have been able to tip journalists and promote their work using cryptocurrency outside of that traditional system. So due to his personal interest, he generates nothing but content for the most part around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And as a small organization of about $4 million a year, they're one of our top performing organizations. They do about $250,000, $300,000 a year in cryptocurrency alone. But again, that's a very unique case. That's a small organization with not a whole lot of tools in terms of marketing communications, but really targeted efforts, kind of doing everything right. And then over the right once more, the Lupus Foundation, where I came from originally. What they've got is kind of a balance. They had a CEO and a management team who slowly but surely became incredibly excited around the technology, got set up to take crypto in the right way so they didn't get stuck holding the bag, say, having cryptocurrency not auto-convert. And then the final piece is they were ready to do some marketing. So they had a press release, which was the best performing press release of the year for the organization, where they announced they were taking Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So again, it's very exciting and it's got some star power when it comes to your communications. The next piece is they accepted cryptocurrency at their annual gala in New York, had QR codes people could scan and donate on the table, had a guy on stage, the MC, who said, "Where are my Bitcoin donors at?" A couple tables celebrated. They really got into it and they had fun. And they didn't do a whole lot outside of setting up the QR codes, the initial press release, a tweet here and there. And they were able to generate, a consistent and new stream of revenue with pretty limited efforts, but just a level of interest in the right setup. And then, Mercy Corps is more blockchain, so I don't think that's a good fit for the audience. I think those three are pretty good encapsulation. And then finally here, we've got the Pineapple Fund, which some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, but probably not everybody. And then Fidelity Charitable and Ripple. These are three different case studies with three different angles. So the Pineapple Fund is an individual donor of significant means. So someone who gave $56 million worth of Bitcoin to 60 nonprofits at the turn of 2017, 2018. And they had an incredible amount of Bitcoin. They had accrued from very early on. That appreciated greatly, of course, and they wanted to do something philanthropic. And they set up an application process. And at that time, not a whole lot of organizations were paying attention. And a bunch of incredibly small organizations got, the donations were anywhere in the range of 250,000 to, I believe, 5 million was the highest. And you can check that out on the Pineapple Fund's website. Just give it a Google. The next one would be Fidelity Charitable. So obviously they have a great number of resources, but this is a cool case study in terms of what the marketing can do when a team dedicates a little bit of time and energy into leveraging those resources. So they had a chief marketing officer over at Fidelity who turned the program from a $6 million Bitcoin donations a year program in 2016 to generating $69 million in donations in 2017 alone. By doing some targeted communications. They worked with key opinion leaders, and they reached out to some folks who, as you could imagine, were pretty happy to be working with an organization of that stature. They leveraged those communications, got it in front of the right people, generated a real audience, and have now to date raised over $100 million in cryptocurrency. And then the final one is Ripple. And Ripple is the one we mentioned, the $4 million donation to the Ellen DeGeneres Wildlife Fund. What Ripple has done as well is they've donated $50 million to universities all around the world who teach blockchain and cryptocurrency related courses and programming. There was a $29 million donation from Ripple to Donors Choose, and that really came down to kind of a personal relationship between one of the founders and the CEO of that organization. I believe I'm missing one. There was a $25 million donation as well from a founder to their alma mater. But they've been really good about the corporate social responsibility angle. And they're a great example. Binance is another giant exchange. They're more profitable each quarter than Deutsche Bank, for example. They do a lot with charities. We're seeing this intersection happen more and more, but there are still a ton of incredibly lucrative projects out there that are untapped in terms of formal association partnerships. So that corporate piece is kind of the third and final. Okay.
So Tim, I think this is where we hand it back over to you for a little bit before we get into some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the things that people are always going to wonder about are like, how can I, like, besides getting this off the ground, then what, right? And especially as we shift into new forms of currency, new forms of engagement, it was interesting. One of the more kind of active consultants in the and as I'm talking, I'm going to go make sure that I can pop things over to my screen. One of the more active folks on Twitter in the traditional fundraising space, I would say, actually had put up a tweet last night for a course he was doing about like all the different ways and transactions that people have, and like Bitcoin was at the top, amusingly enough. Like, people are in even the traditional fundraisers are starting to pay attention to this. And what they were doing is talking about, well, how do you enter this type of thing when you're tracking it? And so I've been working with Neon CRM for a while, and so I was playing around with this, and I'd actually pinged Alex and Pat earlier today, and I said, well, what types of data do you actually get on these donors? And so Alex, Pat, what types of data do you get actually from a donor that you can actually enter in your CRM? I know it depends, so we're going to go toward the anonymous one, and then I want to end on the other one. So tell me what typically is the structure? What are you getting?
Sure. So like you said, there's kind of two options. You have the option of going the anonymous route, where you don't collect donor information, and you would just get the kind of the size, the time, and the date of the donation. Mm-hmm. If you decide to go the anonymous route, which some clients do. And then the second option being, collecting, let's say name, email, address, really whatever information you want to collect that can be customized. Mm-hmm. And for any donor that does enter their at least email address, they would automatically get a tax receipt sent to them, which makes it a lot easier when they go to, file their taxes at the end of the year.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we can do when we're thinking about this from a constituent relationship management standpoint, we're starting to get some questions flow in, by the way, so continue to pop them in or use the hashtag Bitcoin Tuesday. But real quick overview of how we should think about this from a data structure standpoint. I think that from a data standpoint, it's very good to think about these as the equivalent of what you do with a stock gift. So building policies and procedures around like stock entry, I think, is a very good corollary to how we should manage cryptocurrency, by the way. So when I worked at my last job, for instance, whenever we did get a stock gift, it should be automatically converted and reconciled at the day that it was received. So even if you actually take a few days to like, you forgot how to convert it or something like that because you're not using something that doesn't do it automatically, like, from a typical standpoint, my recommendation is for donor management needs, put it in at the day it was received. Now, with Neon CRM, if I'm going to go ahead and actually enter that donation, and I'm going to do it on my good friend Abraham here, Abraham Van Helsing, let's say I received a decent sized Bitcoin donation of 5,000. You can even allocate it and create your own campaigns. Maybe you start an omni-channel engagement, which I honestly think is going to be the best way that you're going to like leverage Bitcoin. Is you got to tell people that you're doing it, and you got to tell them in a bunch of different ways, right? So you could track it, maybe even to its own dedicated campaign. In this case, I'm going to do Giving Tuesday. Maybe you initiated your Bitcoin launch on that day. So then what we can do is say, okay, let's go ahead and actually go ahead and enter it. Now, one of the things that you can do in Neon CRM is, and I've done it, add your own cryptocurrency. Now, notice that there's a payment received date versus an entered date. So this is how you can make a distinction of I'm entering at $5,000 because I actually got it last week. That's all you need to do. And if you actually realize that you're accepting it, or even wanted to put different forms of cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin versus something else, you could do that and configure it. The only other thing that I think might be interesting to think about here before we open it up for further questions from a configuration standpoint is the stewardship side. And so what I mean about that is that while definitely there's technology such as what Giving Block enables people to do around like automatic receipting, if you actually are collecting information on a person, such as receiving their email, what might be cool to think about is to create even dedicated appreciation letters or communications that relate to cryptocurrency itself. So you can create either a welcome onboarding series that engages the community, because I think this is going to be a really good way to think about it is like it's peer-to-peer engagement, right? Or you can even say, look, whenever I get cryptocurrency, I want to send a special cryptocurrency email, right? This is what people have been doing a long time with in-kind donations or donor-advised funds, right? Like actually with donor-advised funds, a lot of times you don't want to receipt them for the gift amount because it's already been done through the donor-advised fund. So making a distinction in your processes between if you're getting crypto donations that happen to be from Fidelity and they're just telling you that versus your own direct ones, that's a very important distinction, because a Fidelity one, you shouldn't be receiving the donor for that because it's actually gone to Fidelity. Whereas for you, you're getting it directly and you can thank them for that directly. And so if you wanted to do that either through the platform or a follow-up thing, or heck, if you somehow get their address because you happen to have that donor on file and you can send them a physical letter thanking them for their cryptocurrency donation, minds will be blown. Retention will go up, actually. And so I think that these little things, it's almost the ultimate, and Alex, Pat, maybe we could start to open up the conversation at this point. I think that cryptocurrency can represent almost like, as we think about the future and the transformative nature of what that is, if we actually start to embed the traditional elements of engagement and stewardship and just good, honest to goodness data policy around it, I think actually adoption rates will go up and people will get even more excited about it. Yeah, so we did have a question in terms of how about we kick it on over to questions, and then I have a bunch myself, guys, going to be honest. In terms of organizations you support, do you work with B Corps and help them access crypto funds?
So at the moment, We're not working with any B Corps, and the focus is really on 501c nonprofits because of that major tax incentive for
Mhm.
making crypto donations to those kind of organizations.
Awesome. No, and that's a good distinction. I think that as people get more comfortable with social responsibility around this, the lines are going to get blurred a bit, but we kind of like almost have to walk before we run, right, guys? Like it's like
Yeah.
let's get the nonprofits comfortable with it, and then definitely shifting into the B Corp stuff, I think, is a good move.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this could be something that becomes as common one day as using a credit card, right?
Mhm.
So at that point, it's not just appealing for nonprofits; it's just how people begin transacting.
So on a practical basis, from if let's say I'm a complete dummy and I don't even know where to like start with Bitcoin on a personal basis, you know, is it as simple as, because while we were talking, I pulled up the Coinbase website, for instance. Is it as simple as downloading the app and just kind of playing around there?
Yeah. So with cryptocurrency, again, a distinction just for the sake of the presentation.
Hmm.
We wouldn't recommend any individual invest in one cryptocurrency or another cryptocurrency. If you're trying to familiarize yourself with cryptocurrency in general, you can absolutely try to download a specific application, navigate setting up your own account. For organizations, there's some compliance hurdles, and depending on the exchange that you work with, you want to make sure you do it in the right way. But anyone can reach out to us. If they try to set up their own personal account, they've never done that before. We can't help with that necessarily if they're trying to invest. But if they run into hurdles with a compliance process with an exchange, absolutely reach out to us. We can be helpful.
Yeah, and for more general resources, we do have a blog where we cover a lot of different topics related to cryptocurrency and nonprofits. We send out a newsletter on a pretty regular basis. And then there's also, general cryptocurrency news websites like CoinDesk or The Block, which are like your New York Times and Wall Street Journal, but crypto specific. So those are great resources as well.
So, when organizations are also wanting to get comfortable with this, what are some other questions that they typically have about maybe like the wallet options themselves, for instance, right? Like, are they typically doing and focusing even marketing around something just like Bitcoin, or is it the concept of cryptocurrency itself that you found more effective?
Yeah. So that's a big thing, actually, accepting one cryptocurrency versus another. Some organizations are only equipped to accept Bitcoin. The issue with that is if your donor has to move back into Bitcoin, then they can't get their tax incentive. They trigger what's called a taxable event by jumping from one crypto to another. So there's the functional aspect of it. The other piece around why it's fun, but also important to engage these other cryptocurrency communities, is they do have different communities built around them. So it not only makes sense from a functional standpoint to accept the other core cryptocurrencies. Of course, there's going to be random cryptocurrencies out there that somebody randomly generated. You don't have to be set up to take everything. But even being set up to take even a handful of the top core ones, which is generally what we recommend at the beginning, allows you to tap into those communities who do have their own unique key opinion leaders, their own unique conversations happening online, and you get to target them a little bit differently. We've done some campaigns over the last year actually that were targeted around specific cryptocurrencies outside of just Bitcoin, and those communities perform well in terms of donors, but also in terms of coming out and spreading the word as an army that you otherwise wouldn't have access to.
And there's been some questions in terms of like compatibility for something like your CRM. When you're getting reports out of the stuff that you're managing with Giving Block, for instance, what can people see? What can people extract and use if they want to work with something other than Neon CRM, for instance?
Right. So, ultimately, you can use any CRM in a sense, but you will have to manually enter the information. But we would give you the reports that have, the donor information that you're requesting, like name, email, the amount, the date, time of the donation, things like that. Further down the road, we're hoping to automate some of those integrations with different CRM systems, but right now it's a mostly manual process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of the key here, is that a lot of the other vendors in the space too, like, it's going to take a long time for us to think about how to fully structure this, which is why I'm really excited to be working with Giving Block. So we do it right, and we work with the best when it comes to how it should properly work with a CRM too. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions coming in. From a marketing standpoint, one of the things that I actually wrote down, when it comes to just kind of all of this is, it's almost you would even put it's peer-to-peer, right? And so when it comes to like peer-to-peer engagement, one of the things that we find, we actually did a study for our Rallybound product, for instance, for peer-to-peer fundraising, where if you retain the fundraiser themselves, the fundraiser versus like the people that happen to donate through that fundraiser, if you retain them over for about 3-4 years, year-over-year retention leads to 130% revenue increase. And so I kind of see the same correlation here, where if you focus on creating messaging and engagement aimed specifically at these advocates, at people who are excited about cryptocurrency, I find that approach is going to be a lot more effective than if you're just treating them like a regular donor. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a targeted kind of engagement strategy and outreach, just like how you would fundraise from any specific demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So it is still this, kind of, in a sense, tribal community, because it's not everyone yet, right? We said it's about 50 million people globally right now, but it's growing incredibly quickly every day.
What's the type of what's the type of person that you find is typically using cryptocurrency as a donor? Like, what's the persona of that person? Is there like a pretty consistent type of person doing this, or is it running all over the place?
It's certainly getting wider and wider, but typically it's a younger demographic. Millennials and Gen Z are really heavy into this.
Mm-hmm.
But as you start seeing some of these big organizations like Facebook or Wells Fargo and JP Morgan entering the space, that's certainly becoming less and less the case. But for now, at least, it's still pretty on the young side.
What was the stat that you shared recently about crypto versus stocks for the younger folks?
Oh yeah, so it was half of millennials prefer to invest in crypto over stocks, and then there was another one related to that. A financial advisor was talking about how for his clients, 90% of millennials prefer Bitcoin over gold investments. So a lot of people are seeing this as kind of the digital gold, the 2.0 gold.
Well, guys, I have told my financial advisor, for instance, that I wanted to at least explore it. My wife immediately rolled her eyes, but maybe I'll send her this presentation that might help her out.
Yeah, and Tim, I saw one other question come in from Carrie. It looks like she was asking if we could work directly with the Giving Block.
Of course.
I just wanted to get an answer for that. So Carrie, yes, you would work directly with us.
Yeah, kind of one of the great things about the Neon One ecosystem is that we're curating these experiences for people, but that is why the Giving Block, you can go directly to them too. We just, are really excited to work with them. And also, if you are interested in exploring Neon CRM a little bit more, going to throw some of that contact information up before shifting back to the Giving Blocks information. But, guys, do we have any other final questions, first of all? We got a little bit more time for that. And then otherwise, want to know if we have any final thoughts from y'all in terms of where do you see things moving in the next, let's say, in 2020, what's the future of philanthropy and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general?
Yeah, so I think it's certainly trending in a direction that the kind of the adoption of cryptocurrencies is really starting to pick up, especially because, these massive organizations, like we mentioned, Facebook creating their own, it's making people more comfortable with technology. And it's ultimately going to continue to grow. I mean, these cryptocurrency exchanges, for example, are adding, even just in the US, tens of thousands of people a day. And that's, of course, going to translate to more users and then more donations. But over the kind of the shorter term, Tim, if I can just get one plug in here about Bitcoin Tuesday.
Oh, please. Yes, we got it. We got to talk about Bitcoin Tuesday. Hashtag Bitcoin Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. So this year we're going to be running the first ever Bitcoin Tuesday, which is a cryptocurrency campaign on Giving Tuesday. So it'll be on December 3rd, just like Giving Tuesday, but the focus will be on bringing together the nonprofits who fundraise cryptocurrency with all the major, influencers and organizations in the crypto industry to give, marketing and financial support for the nonprofits that are what we'll consider crypto friendly.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. We actually had a recent webinar with Giving Tuesday, and I will say that aligns very much in the types of things that organization is trying to energize people about, bringing people together in community, education, philanthropy. That's awesome. That's really cool. So we'll give a little bit of amplification on that after this webinar, but I wanted to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. It was a really, really great overview, great kind of unpacking of this really, really important, really vital way that we're going to be growing our generosity ecosystem. And Alex, Pat, really proud to have you part of the Neon One ecosystem and looking forward to kind of growing this together.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having us. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good day, folks, and we'll definitely be in touch. We'll be putting this recording up by end of day is the goal. So if you had to leave early looking at this later or just wanted to get more reference information, obviously reach out to the folks at Giving Block or at Neon One here, and otherwise we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.